You never speak ill of the dead because they'll come get you.
Imagine yourself under a starry sky, around the warm glow of a sacred fire, where speakers gather to share their wisdom and insights. Creating a sacred space where all are welcome to warm their hands, here are your hosts, Caitlin Stormbreaker, Sarenth Odinson, and Jim Two Snakes, discuss spirituality, mythology, animism, and culture around a virtual sacred fire.
Welcome.
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 Welcome. Won't you join us around Grandfather Fire?
O blessed ones bearing beauty, wielding wisdom wisely, taking time to teach, walking the web of weird, carving new paths in places. You who tread the ground before us, you who walk the ways with us, you who bring us bright blessings, you who bring us bane and boon, you carry our calling and craft, you speak into soundless silence the spells that strengthen us, you who grew us from the ground up, you who ground us from the ground down, you who guide us and gift us in Gabo. Hail to you, O blessed ones, hail to you, O ancestors, blood and bone, spirit, lineage, initiation, tradition, powerful ancestors, good ancestors, blessed ancestors. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for guiding us. Thank you always for walking with us. Hail to you all. Stuheil.
You're listening to another episode of Around Grandfather Fire, episode 117. I'm your host, Jim Two Snakes, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Sarenth Odinson. How's it going tonight, Sarenth?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing pretty good. I'm have a little bit of a longer weekend, got a little bit of time off, not completely, but a little bit extra time off, so I'm not going to complain about that. And
rock on.
Decided I was going to do things that entertained me this weekend, so we're not mowing the yard or doing anything else. So that's how we're flowing today.
Hell yes. Take your break.
Yeah. How about you? Your things are going well on your side?
Things are going pretty well. I needed a mental health day, so I took last night off from work, and I got to meet up with some really good friends of mine. And I don't remember if you do you recall Diana, Rachel, and Cinti?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Beautiful people, wonderful people. I loved spending time with them. My partner and I got to go out and spend some good quality time. And it was very rejuvenating.
That
Very
is
needed.
awesome.
And then I slept like the dead and woke up at 6 this morning. So, which is, for those who are longtime listeners, that's not my normal. So, rest has been something that I've been getting a lot more of, especially since a couple weeks ago when I started really putting out for this new book. And I'm doing between 500, 800 a night.
Wow.
Except for on my days off. I've got 200 more to go today, and then I'll have my 500 word limit. But yeah, I've got about 2 weeks now worth of content where I've done at least 500 words.
Wow. That's impressive.
Well, thank you. What I'm hoping to do is have this damn book written by the time December rolls around. I would like to have it written by Yule so that I can start editing it.
There you go.
For those who don't know, I'm working on 3 books. The first one is a Basics of Heathen Spirit Work. The second one is Rune Spirit Work. And the third one is Advanced Spirit Work at this point. So,
why struggle your way through writing one book when you can struggle your way through writing 3?
I sat back and went, I'm already at 30,000 words with all the blog posts and stuff that I've collated, and this book isn't even half written. So it's going to probably have to be a 3-part. I was fooling myself thinking I could squish this into one. I'm like, nice. There ain't no way in fucking hell.
Sounds like you're going into sufficient depth, so that's good.
Very sorely needed.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I've been working on.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, for anybody that's listening, Caitlin is not with us tonight. Caitlin and her lovely family are out enjoying the lake for this holiday weekend, which I cannot blame them at all. We all need it. It's been a long year. And on the bright side, we're not stuck at Burning Man. Right? Did you see about that?
Yes. Yes, I did. And I laughed my ass off.
It's like, oops.
Just a bit. Like, how tone deaf can you be in the middle of a housing crisis to go and build a city in the middle of the desert, not check the forecast, no pre-planning at all, just fuck it. We'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I don't think we've got anything to announce or anything that we want to throw out. You don't have any classes or anything coming up anytime soon?
Actually, I do.
Awesome. Okay. Glad I asked.
Yeah, me too. So coming up, it is Ann Arbor Pagan Pride.
Oh, that's right. It is that time of year.
Yeah, it is that time of year. And give me 5 seconds and I'm going to pull up when that actually is.
Getting into spooky season too.
Yeah. September the 9th. It's going to be Saturday, September the 9th, and it's going to be on Washtenaw Community College's campus. Donations for the food pantry are welcome. We also welcome donations directly to Ann Arbor Pagan Pride. And so our 2023 Pagan Pride schedule is actually up and on the a2paganpride.com. We open at 11 o'clock in the morning and we shut down at 6 p.m. And there are little 15, 30-minute breaks in between each class. Each class lasts about 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And we have a wide range of different classes. And I'm actually going to be doing the main ritual, which is rooted in community.
Nice.
And I'm also going to be doing another workshop, digging the Dvergar, developing relationships with dwarves.
Ooh, sweet.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to both.
If anybody's never been to Ann Arbor Pagan Pride, if you're within a decent driving distance, I encourage you to check it out because it's a nice location right there on the college campus. Good classes, vendors, lots of people to hang out with. It's a nice little event. Yeah,
last time I checked, we had 18 vendors for this, which is just wild to me.
It's a perfect size too. It's not. It's not a super huge event, but then again, it's not a super small one either. It's right in that middle range. You're going to be able to find stuff that you're looking for, classes that you're interested, people that you've been wanting to meet. So,
yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing people there.
That's really cool. Well, with that, I'd like to welcome our guest tonight. Cris Ashburn is a ancestral priestess who does readings and divination, a lot of ancestor work, and is a specialist in transitions and transformations. Cris, welcome to Around Grandfather Fire.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I was looking forward to this because, Sarah and I, we have talked a lot about, obviously a lot of rituals have to do with transitions, and we do a lot of, I've talked a lot about ancestral work too. So I was always, I'm always interested in hearing how other people are approaching it. And then you do readings for people too that have a lot to do with their ancestral work and their own shadow and death work. So I was curious about how all that gets incorporated in too. So I'm really excited to have you on tonight.
I'm excited to talk about it. I'm ready. This is my favorite topic. Yeah.
Awesome. So for folks who don't know much about you, where can they find information on you? Where are you at?
I'm all over the place. I am all seeing all. No, I am. My .com is Cris Ashburn, which that's a CrisAshburn. And then I am also on YouTube. I actually started on YouTube. I am on Patreon as of yesterday. It is officially back open. I was there for 3 years and paused it, had to attend to some things, and now I'm back going. So that's there. I am on TikTok. Like, you can find me all over the place, but
Excellent.
predominantly every other week. I am on YouTube. I'm consistently on Patreon now, and you can always find me on my .com.
Excellent. So with ancestor work, especially because that's an area I have a deep amount of interest in, curious to pick your brain on.
Yeah.
What's the first thing you recommend for folks?
Oh, well, usually it depends on what they're struggling with, because some people come and they are struggling with sort of this really big disconnect from trauma that's happened. And that's a little bit different than someone who's kind of like, I had a really good relationship with this member and they passed and now I'm trying to talk to them. It's a slightly different vibe. So the first thing is I would ask kind of what they're dealing with, and then go from there. Now, if it's someone who is simply trying to talk to a loved one that they did have that relationship with already, usually the answer is to, one, if it's relatively new or there's a lot of grief, it's to work with that first. Because sometimes what happens is you can be sort of, you know how with a hurricane, you can stand in the center and it's completely quiet?
Yeah, until you hit the rest of the wall.
But all of that storm is going around you, right?
Right.
And so you'll be in that, and then the storm around you is the grief, and you're trying to communicate, and you're thinking that nothing is talking, no one's talking back. Mm-hmm. But what's happening is that there's so much grief that you're in, you can't hear them. There's so much hurt, right?
Gotcha.
There's so much to carry that it's hard to listen. And so one of the first things is usually we address that. We talk about that, where they are with that, to try and work a bit with perspective shifts there and sort of healing a bit through that so that they can be in sort of a true calm spot to hear, instead of kind of pulling into that center and not listening. With someone who has had a lot of trauma with blockages and things like that, or perhaps adoption stuff, that also is something that's along those lines. I usually will ask them how they feel about ancestors, and we start with what their definition of ancestor even is, because that's pretty wild in itself, and it tends to be a better way to have a stepping stone up to working with ancestors when the word family has kind of been villainized or bastardized in a lot of their context. They don't really have a healthy version of that yet. So one way to do that is to find the other healthy ways that aren't through that lens, but are still ancestors.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that sounds kind of familiar there. Yeah, you sometimes have to find that person that is a healthy starting off point within the ancestral line. Or I don't know, Sarah and I, we kind of talked about before about how, like, sometimes depending on with cases of adoption and that sort of thing, you have to recognize that your ancestors aren't just your bloodline. They might, and in real desperate cases, like if you just absolutely have nobody else, you might even be looking at, you know, a teacher or a mentor or somebody that was really powerful in your life that acts as that touching off point for ancestor work. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, and not only that, there are people who were family, friends of family and stuff that become part of that as well. If you're welcomed in at some point, you are now family, right? And so that's part of it. You are now part of the hall, so just come on, grab a plate, let's go, right? So they're part of that too. And I think sometimes that doesn't get thought about either, the process or the possibility that could be an option too. So yeah, teachers and friends of the family, and that like aunt that wasn't actually your aunt, but was totally your aunt.
Right. But when you went over to her house and asked for something to drink, she said, you know where the cups are. That means you're in. That's the
Exactly. And even further than that, let's talk about the animals that we had growing up. Our pets who soothed us and comforted us, and their spirits, they're part of that too. So
that's a good point.
There's so many different options.
Yeah, that's an interesting one to touch on, because the pets and that sort of thing, like a lot of people might be hesitant to make that your first go but like, and it might not be the main thing that you go forward with your ancestor work. But in my mind, I'm like, if that's where you start, if you had like the loyal dog growing up and you know that dog wouldn't let any harm come to you. And then when other spirits are approaching and saying, hey, we're an ancestor, if that dog is okay with them, they're probably okay.
Exactly. Yeah. If that was your safe space, then start with your safe space.
Yep.
And that's kind of the point of all of it, is where was your safe space? Where is your safe space? If you don't know it and you don't have it within the term family, then let's find it. And then we grow from there. Then we can expand it, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Makes complete sense to me. How do you have most people kind of begin that work? Do you have them start with a reading, or just do you talk about you talk about the term ancestor and what that means to them, but do you gradually go into a reading? Do you have them usually start with like an ancestor altar? What's your process look like?
So I have two options usually. There is a reading that I do, an ancestral wisdom reading is what it used to be called. Now it's just an ancestral session because that's wordy. And and it is something that I sort of step into I like to call it stepping into the energetic tapestry of a person and like momentarily receiving their mail. So I can see what messages are coming in that they're just not paying attention to perhaps, or what is being kind of repeated, or, you know, like all of those thumbnails, or, you know, those little dots, thumbtacks on the board with the string, you know, and seeing like how many, okay, well, look, you got a lot over here. So clearly there are messages. And, you know, then about an hour ahead of time before I talk to the client, I will set space and I just talk with them, like the ancestors, before I even talk to the person. And spend an hour just sort of writing down things and pulling things. I'll pull stones and incense, and we'll do cards, automatic writing. I also will feel physical things in my body a lot. So I'll use that because I have certain telltales in that. Like, for instance, like grief is always right at the bottom of the throat on the chest. And it's a very like tight, restricted, jittery feeling. So whenever I feel that a lot, I'm like, okay, so this is someone that's probably recent, or it's very, very heavy for them still. And you know, those kind of things. And so I'll write all those down and sort of compile it. And then I start, you know, by inviting that person in. And we talk about what I found. I tell them things that I've heard that the ancestors have told me to pass on. I tell them sort of the tapestry of everything I picked and why and those things, and explain all the lines through the thumbtacks, you know. And through that, usually what happens is there's sort of this emotional unraveling, like that little piece in the sweater that just need to be tugged just a bit, and then it all pours out. And it is in a very cathartic way. It pours out like it just needed to be released somewhere. And a lot of times with this kind of work, with that grief and such, there is this sense of it's too heavy to put down because it's too heavy for people. People aren't, you know, ready to deal with this. I am a burden with this, so I can't talk about it. And in that space, that's specifically what it's for. So, you know, I tell people, like, look, if you get emotional during this, that's good. That means, like, that's fine. That's what you should be doing if you want to do that. If you feel that, then do it. It's a safe space to do it. But usually we start with something like that to where we can see what that general message is, what's going on. And I essentially am like a mediator between, and a energy worker at the same time, pretty much. And so it's kind of a jumble of things that I've just developed over the years of doing what I do. And it became an ancestral session. And that's one of the first places people usually start, is because they know that they want to work with them, but they maybe don't know how, or they don't know what they're trying to be told, or, you know, to start. And through that is how we kind of figure out, okay, so this is what's going on. This is the message. And then I will give ways to work with that. Sometimes it is simple. It is as simple as, hey, throughout the day, speak to them. It doesn't matter where you are. You are that altar. You are them literally, like they're in you. Speak to them. Just speak to them. And it's okay if you don't hear them back yet. Just know that they're there and listening. You know, And then eventually that will sort of start to open up. You'll get a little more comfortable. And then you go from there. For some people, they are very physical. So altars and things do work. Stones. I often will start with actually a shrine more so, because I think an altar implies a lot more work being done there. And I think that can bring a lot of pressure through responsibility to things when people are already feeling overwhelmed. Yeah. So I tend to like to start with like a shrine. Like, do you have pictures? Do you have a candle? Do you have some incense? Do you just set a picture of grandma up and just like have coffee with her? You know, something very small, but it is a ritual. It's simple. It's something you can still do. And it is something maybe that you even would have shared with her in life. And that kind of takes the sort of buildup out of it that a lot of people keep themselves from doing things due to the buildup, you know? And then the other thing is I do have an Ancestral 101 course and a 102. And that does sort of go more into sort of the breakdown of what the ancestor is as a definition. I go back in the etymology of things. I talk about the key hominid women and sort of like this, like the genealogy line and stuff, and how like really, where do we draw the line on that? There are different kinds of ancestors. Absolutely. I will never argue that. But ancestor in itself just means gone before. Antecedere. That's it. And then if you want to get into time and get all wibbly wobbly, what is even before? Are we our own ancestors? So there's a lot to be said there for playing around with things when people are coming into it in this very sort of black and white way of like seeing what family is and what their support system is. There are so many options, and that is two of the ways that people start. The course allows them to kind of do it at their own pace. Mm-hmm. And I've had several people say to me, like, they thought that when they started it, they were going to do it like real quick and go through, like breeze through. They're like, oh, this will be simple. And then they were like, oh, I have to go back through, and then I got to do the extra. It's got to sink in. Yeah. So there's a lot in it, and it takes time to kind of sink in. But one of the key things for me is it's about the thought process. I'm not here to teach anybody as a mentor about your correspondence list. I'm not doing a pop quiz on paper. What I want is for you to understand the thought process of things. I want you to know in the heart, not know in the head. The head has its place, but without this, without the heart, you don't get it. It doesn't sink in, at least for me.
Yeah.
So that's typically how I teach, and that's usually where I start people.
I appreciate that. It's hard because, you know, like a lot of people here, I've heard it and I've probably said it a few times. You need to do ancestor work. Well, what does that actually look like for a lot of people? It's a very daunting thing. I was just I like the phrasing that you use too. I was just looking at your YouTube channel, and like even one of the couple of the titles that were interesting was getting out of a black and white view and what to do about conflicting views. Those seemed like pretty darn helpful things as well.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it can be very easy to sort of see in the black and white, and they have their modes, they have their gifts like everything does. But with ancestors, particularly dealing with that, there is a lot of gray. Humans, you know? So with that, there are people who have both good and bad qualities and things like that. And it's like, you know, when people are talking about bringing in ancestors to help them and stuff, I'm like, okay, well, like, was your one uncle a really cheesy car salesman? Sorry to anyone who's a car salesman, but like, I hope you're not cheesy. Anyway, anyone who was like a really cheesy car salesman or something, and you know, you're trying to make a big pitch on something, you talk to that ancestor, you know, bring him in. He may not be good for other things. Perhaps he was not the most reliable. So, you know, if you are trying to aim for consistency on something, probably not the one you want to call. But if you want to make a good sales pitch, that's who you're talking to, right? There are,
I guess it even if you look at it on a human spectrum, like in reality, right here, right now, this week, I could be a very good ancestor on Tuesday because I helped somebody out. But on Wednesday, I'm even having a shit day. I might be a horrible ancestor on Wednesday. That doesn't mean there's a lot of consistency also with humans. So
yeah, no, there isn't. And I think that's, we're complex.
Exactly.
And so, therefore the working is complex too. I think the ancestral work is both to simultaneously realize that we feed and heal them, but also that they need healing and being fed. And that maybe in some areas they've fed a little too much on things they shouldn't have. And we are actively, as the living ancestor, what I like to call it, choosing to not feed on certain things and redirect our energy to something else, and that's sort of just evolution, is learning what works better for all of us.
I think it's kind of a goofy notion,
and the responsibility that comes with that
one ancestor should be everything to us, right? It's kind of not how human beings work. It's not really how humanity as an aggregate works. Like, why would you put that undue pressure, not only on you, but like on your family line to provide you every little thing? Like,
right.
Uncle John might have been an excellent carpenter, but couldn't hack it as an electrician if you tried.
Right.
I'm not going to go to my uncle, say, Joe, if he was the family electrician, if I need a carpentry job either. Like, we all have different
shoddy
skills.
Carpet jobs.
Right. We all have different skills and talents. And I think the notion that we have to be paragons, whether of a craft or of a virtue, even to be useful to our descendants, is an unfortunate trap that people can fall into.
Yes. And honestly, also, I have so many ancestors that come through in readings and say, as cautionary tales, don't do what I did. Do not do these things. Take me as a lesson to not go that way. So they also will oftentimes openly admit that was not their forte, and please don't make it yours. Yep. So yeah, but I think also that ties into sort of this culture of making saints of the dead. That often happens sort of just in society as a whole. It's like you never speak ill of the dead because they'll come get you. Right. And that has really been more like Victorian times kind of thing coming down. But that I think is part of that happens, is this whole idea that like, well, they're dead now, so they're like, angels purely. And,
No.
Not quite.
I think even for saints, you can definitely. I certainly count the ancestor that gave me part of my name for my confirmation as one of my ancestors, and he had his moments. Like, people forget, Saint Francis de Assisi, before he went off and became a monk, went to war. Wielded a weapon of some kind, maybe a sword, because he came from a wealthy merchant family. And, might have done some fucked up shit while he was at war. And people do not like to think about their saints in that fashion because, damn, they're human. They're not just these abstract divine figures anymore. Yeah.
I think we tend to do that with a lot of things. I mean, even spiritual leaders and gurus and, things like we tend to sort of pedestal. And while I understand it in one aspect because of the reverence for what they do, there is also this level of like, yes, but why can't they also be human? Why can't they do amazing things and be human? Why can human not be that powerful?
Yeah. I think it's interesting when you consider something that the literature for shamanic folks points out. Well, these folks are charlatans. They use trickery, they use deceit. Sometimes I think that something that our interview with David Sheep pointed out was that not all of these shamans are like paragons of virtue. Some of them are outright bastards. And sometimes you don't need a paragon of virtue. You need a bastard to get shit done.
Yeah. True.
When I was reading his book on North Asian shamanism, one of the things that was pointed out was that those who are called black hat shamans are the shamans that are willing to do some rough, horrible shit to see things done.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to the white or yellow hats. The white or yellow hats are people that, generally speaking, won't do curse work, won't do harmful magic.
Mm-hmm.
Black hats will do whatever the fuck needs to be done to get things done.
Absolutely.
And just as you wouldn't expect Uncle Joe to teach you how to shingle a roof, you also probably, if he never saw combat, you wouldn't ask him, hey, how do I handle this asshole?
Yeah.
And you may not want your combat veterans giving you advice on how to handle an asshole at work, because their advice might be just to take him out back and shoot his ass.
Better ask that HR ancestor instead.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Maybe that one. Or the politician or something. Like someone who's, good at smoothing and
yeah.
Yeah.
So many of these ancestral things that show up, and Jim's seen some of this shit. So I'm sitting here giggling at him across the way because he's seen some of these things pop up in readings before.
Yeah.
Where an ancestor will be like, that's not the issue. The issue's over here, and you're just hyper focusing over here because that's what you want to focus on. Because sometimes, like, our ancestors can be accurate and total pricks at the same time and accurately diagnose where we are because they've been there.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And sometimes, furthermore, that's what's needed to get through.
Yep.
Whenever I do them, I do have people worry sometimes about people who are unwanted coming through. And, when I cast circle, when I do space, because I don't actually cast circle, I do like sacred space. Anyway, I define it as the enlightened ancestors, the healing ancestors, and healed ancestors, those who are seeking to better themselves in the line in a healthy form, period. And I specify that last part because you can be healing and be trying to take shortcuts.
Good point. Very good point.
Yeah. But, there are those that come through, and I've even had to be like, look, this is really blunt, and I'm sorry ahead of time if it I'm just going to say it, though, because I say what I get. And they're like, oh, yeah, ouch, but yeah, I need it. Like, usually that ancestor speaks that language of that family, you know what I mean? And that's just how they communicate. That's how they need that message to come through. Some people work with Kuan Yin, and some people get hit over the head with Hecate. Like, it's a different vibe,
Fitbit.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
I also saw that you do death midwifery too. How connected is that? Is the ancestor work? Is that a smooth transition from one to the other? Are they never connected? How tell us a little bit more about that.
So death midwifery is something that I got trained for after my father died. I was already interested in it, but I was like, I don't know if I'd be the type for that. I don't know if I'm the bedside tending type. And I was proved very wrong because I asked that question out loud, right? I made that judgment, and then the ancestors were like, ha, 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 watch this. So I watched, and I ended up becoming a death midwife through Angie Buchanan. And what that has done for my work, honestly, is give me a lot of perspective and foundation with the entire attitude towards death in general. With death midwifery, one of the things that they teach you is, death is not an emergency. Nothing needs to be fixed with it. It simply is and is unfolding, right? And so, like, if you have someone pass and you get the call to come tend the bodies, which I guess back up here, for those who don't know what death midwifery is. Death midwifery is also called death doula. Being a death doula is also that. And there, some people will argue about the terminology, but either way, same shit. And what you are is essentially a companion and a liaison to the person who is dying and their family secondary. Usually it's to the person first. And you are kind of a stone between the medical and the funeral industry. There are things that both can do, and they are wonderful and absolutely needed. And then there's sort of this middle ground, which are the death midwives. And we can do a lot of things. It depends on the state we're in and the rules that we are allowed to do things with. Some you can't really touch the body, so a lot of us don't do anything post-mortem. And then some states you can. And in those states, often we will do, we'll help facilitate home vigils and things like that. So we are non-denominational. So any faith, any of that. And we basically are there to assist how we can and to be the person in between who is there that is, if this person is passing away and they don't want to talk to their family about the fact that they are dying, but they need to talk to somebody. Hi, how you doing? I'm that person. And this idea of it not being an emergency, it's not something you fix, it just simply is, and it is the natural process of things. And just holding space for that. And letting people process in their own time how you can and helping out how you can is sort of the core of that. And also, we often will provide information and things. So point you to funeral homes that are good or directors that we know that might be very good or working with hospice and things like that. We're also good at giving information because we've had to be in that spot, right? But the predominant thing is companionship. The predominant thing is holding a phone because you can't hold it up yourself, but you need to call your son who's many states away and have those last words with him, whatever they are, right? And so I'll hold the phone, and so that's what it is. So then now with the work that I do, I already was very much raised in sort of a pagan Christian household. My mother is pagan. My father was Christian. And so I already had a lot of ritual work and stuff. And I did grow up with, full moon, new moon drummings where we would drum to the ancestors. And as a matter of fact, that ritual is still continued because it's what I call a death tent now in my practice. And those things were already kind of natural to me, the idea of sort of talking to the ancestors and being in this sort of of course people die and that's part of it. My mom also was is a retired LPN from a nursing home, so I grew up with the bus dropping me off at nursing homes where one day I'd show up and just Carol wasn't there, Carol passed on. And so from a very young age, I remember being very curious and very soaked into all of those stories that they would share and remembering I need to remember all of these because these are important. These need to be passed on. No one's listening and I need to keep these. And in that element, death midwifery came after my father's death. And I was there's no one listening to the stories, or at least not enough. And so part of it that transitions over into the work that I do now is listening to the stories, both sides, and sort of being that middle ground so that people can do that, who can have those moments. I have my own story with some of that and not having certain stories that I wish had been passed on. And I understand that. And I've had to go to the astral to get them. So I understand being in that predicament. And as a death midwife, even more so. And so that's one of the main ways that it transfers. And then also just the attitude of it, the fact that death is a natural occurrence and that, there is sort of this desanitization of death where we don't want to see the rot. We don't want to see those things. We want to remember them again, that pristine sort of almost saint thing. And I think that, for people that it works for, then go you, but I think other people, it's hard to process when that's the situation. You don't really see and fully take in the fact that that is happening. And I think ancestor work, one, helps with that. And also this sort of just bringing that attitude into the work that I do, into the rituals and the sessions and such, of this isn't an emergency. We can just set with this, you know? And the moment you do that, everything comes in clear.
That's amazing. Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do like any of the psychopomp sort of aspects too, like helping the spirit cross over?
Yes. So I have in the past been led to do that. It isn't something that is predominant. It's not my main one.
Mm-hmm.
But I have done that. Yes. I am usually more so assisting the dead in speaking to the living, or the living in finding their dead and hearing them.
Gotcha.
I'm usually more so that,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to helping the dead cross over to where they need to be. I appreciate that work, and I've done it a few times, but predominantly I am more of a messenger and
Mm-hmm.
a healer in those sense. Yeah.
It's really nice. Unbeknownst to you, Cris, you've ended up in a really neat trio of episodes that we're doing. And I don't know, I think it's because it's coming up on spooky season or whatever. Our last episode was about funerary rites and practices and
Yes,
taking care
I
of the
was
body.
listening to it.
Now we have your episode here with dealing with some of the ancestor work and the death doula type work. And our next episode is all about dealing with grief. So you're part of a very powerful trio of episodes that we're having right in a row. And I'm really excited about this. So I appreciate the work that you're doing so much, because that transition, as we found out from the last episode with Bone Dust Woman, is that transition's really hard for a lot of people. Our society doesn't like looking at it. We don't like talking about it. And we certainly, you know, the average person is going to have trouble sitting by someone's bedside when they go through that transition.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it is something that I get, again, like the altar conversation earlier, where it's like the big buildup makes it worse than it. I think sometimes the buildup to that makes it worse than when you realize you're actually just like sitting there and being present.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
And then it suddenly becomes sort of the most natural thing to do, at least for myself. Because of course someone would sit there and have this conversation with you. Why wouldn't they? So yeah, I think just we are dealing with very different ideas around death. And I'm really, really excited to see more conversations around our attitude to that. And I was actually listening to the podcast that you did with Bone Dust Woman just, I think it's day before yesterday. And I really enjoyed it. And I dig her as well. And I looked up her stuff and am looking through things. But yeah, I liked a lot of what she had to say about the fact that there is something that is special about rotting back into the earth, not being afraid to do that natural process. And I think that also speaks to what I was saying about, like, no, it just simply is, and transition is, you know, how that works. I mean, the main goddess that I work with is Hell. Change is necessary.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, that's the one constant, and it's coming regardless. So why not get to know it?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's funny, and I don't know, I hope this isn't too blunt of an observation for people, but it strikes me that in my own life, when I've had an ancestor or a loved one that was getting ready to transition over, it was really hard, like you said, to get in that mindset of all I really need to do is sit there and listen and hold space. But I realized when you were saying that is something cultural in some way or another. It was ingrained in me because instinctually, if I were to have a pet that was close to passing, I'd no problem just laying down on the floor next to him, talking to him, and just being there. Yet somehow it's a weird thing that got instilled in me somewhere, that is a difficult thing to do with a human. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. I never really would have thought about that before.
Yeah. Well, and we have a very adverse reaction to sort of dead human bodies. Like, we really do. I mean, horror movies and stuff use it a lot for those reasons. And I think it might have something to do with like the uncanny valley situation. But also it is sort of, it's facing our own mortality too, right? And I think that's a little harder to do for that. I mean, the dog we loved very much and we care for that dog. But we are not that dog, right? And so it's a little more difficult, I think, in that element. But also, yeah, society definitely has sort of a protocol for that. Our protocol for like a dog, we don't really have that. We kind of decide it within our own households what we're going to do for that, you know? Whereas with humans nowadays, there's sort of a set thing that's expected. And so that's probably also part of it too.
Yeah, and probably also the fact that a lot of times when those things are happening, they're happening in like a hospital situation or some other situation where it's hard to be comfortable and just be where. Right. I don't know.
I think there's an unspoken thing that's happening here too, especially when you're talking about the difference between pets and humans, in that generally speaking, we choose when our pets die.
True.
That transition is oftentimes something we choose. There is a degree of control over it. There's a degree of deliberation and care that goes into making that choice. And for the most part, we don't get that with our fellow human beings, because euthanasia is something that is outlawed in this country for the most part.
Yeah. So is that an aspect that gets into our part of why it's scary then is because of that lack of control, you think?
I think that's part of it. I think the other part, and the reason why death is so terrifying, is because you get to watch a person break down. I lost two people in the last year, my grandfather and my father-in-law, and I know that is not how either one of them would have chosen to die. And the process that I watched my father-in-law go through was, to be blunt about it, because it was cancer that took him, fucking painful. This was a man who busted his ass day in, day out, who, when he was sick and getting bored, staying at home, would repaint the fucking walls. This was laying in a hospital bed and having his organs fail on him was not the way he would have chose to have gone. He probably would have, if he had the option, he probably would have chose a different path, but he didn't have it. Mercifully, he did pass in his sleep, and he passed with his wife right there with him. And we were called moments after, and we got to celebrate his life with what amounted to a miniature wake, which was very cool. The transition he went through was rapid in its deterioration, and his quality of life was horrific before the end. Not something I'd wish on many people. We don't do that to our pets generally. So I think there's also this aspect of, we see the horrific nature of the dying process. It's not even the person being dead. It's this person literally doesn't look anything like I remember. This person has clearly pain lines etched in their face, or this person has gone through a really rough transition, etc. Now, in my father-in-law's case, like I said, he went into sleep. He was peaceful, but that doesn't happen for a lot of folks in his situation.
Right.
So I think to a degree, part of why we relate to death so lousy in our modern day and age is we really generally don't choose the means by which we go out. And I think that there's control and there's power there, but there's also, I think that there is something deeply terrifying about a lack of choice in how you live in your final moments that bothers people on a very deep level. And I think that rightly so, especially for a country that screams freedom, freedom, freedom. And this is the one arena that you're going to deny me choice. Well, I mean, with our Supreme Court, clearly not just here now, but yet another arena where freedom, freedom, freedom means not a fucking thing. Okay, sure. But then we approach death as though it's an enemy, because that's how our healthcare system treats it. Instead of saying, okay, there's literally nothing else that we can do at this point. Do you want to transition? It's keep this fucker alive at every cost is the default. You have to do a ton of paperwork relative to dying of natural causes in order for them not to bring you back. So,
and also there's the switchover of it goes from quantity of life to quality of life.
Exactly.
Then it is about it's you are going to die. Absolutely. This is, assured. Mm-hmm. What we can do for you is try to make you as comfortable as possible.
Yeah. And I don't mean to harsh on this too much or harp on it too much, but I think it's a really important factor for how we approach death in this country. And I think it's part of why we carry so much trauma around it. Yes. Because a lot of the factors that are in other death choices are simply not ones that are ours to make anymore.
Yeah, no, that's very good insight. I kind of got to it in a roundabout way, but I'm glad I brought it up so you guys could expand on that, because I think that was important information. That was important to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Yes.
I think too that one of the things that really struck me with having an appreciation and understanding of the death process itself, I worked in a funeral home, and a lot of what you and other guests have talked about with death doula and death work in general has been stuff that I've, in some capacity or another, have had to fill in, because they don't teach pastors and priests how to do this shit. Like, the counseling in that regard is really fucking lacking. You get a good one, but their training for a lot of these guys, they do not know how to handle death. They give you a lot of platitudes, and a lot of it sounds really fucking hollow.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That whole, well, you lived a good life, or well, like this whole sort of,
right.
We'll put flowers on it and it'll be better. We'll throw a prayer on it, Now I was blessed by Angie Buchanan, my death midwife teacher, being also a priestess, a pagan priestess, and that is, that whole line that she came from with hers is, and so when we had classes, it was held in sacred space. There was an altar for the beloved dead at all times up during the classes. It was very much a death space, if you will, the whole time. Just to acclimate us, to get us used to knowing it and befriending it and working within it. And sort of, what you were talking about of there really isn't a lot of training with that. Or even, Jim, you brought up psychopomp work. Even with that, only in certain areas, certain cultures with those things, you will find. And others, no mention of it at all. When they die, they're gone. We do a prayer, and then that's it. Mm-hmm. And it's all about living, though. And it just it has always felt unbalanced, because we're not the priests and priestess, the ones who were the facilitators, the healers, the guides. How are we supposed to guide and facilitate and heal through one of the biggest transitions that people naturally go through, whether it is abrupt or not? Like, that's just that humans are going to die.
Honestly, that particular verbiage always has kind of made my teeth itch on dying of natural causes. All causes of death are natural.
That's what I meant by that, really, is like this idea that, or another one of my little like favorites where I'm like, interesting, is before their time.
No, I'm pretty sure they arrived exactly when they fucking meant to.
I'm pretty sure that happened like on time. I mean, I'm not like the timekeeper, but but I get the sentiment behind it, right? I get the sentiment there and why it's being said, and I can understand that. But every time I hear those two things, I do go, but do we hear what we're saying? Just like the phrase, and this in Death Midwifery is one that I was taught about, never even thought about, but I was angry after my dad died and people would say it to me, which is, I'm sorry to hear that. Think about the wording of that. I'm sorry to hear that. Not, I feel bad for your loss. I empathize with you. How can I help even would be helpful with that. But it is
even something dead generic, please pardon the pun. Yeah, like even something I'm sorry that you're going through that is much more empathetic than I'm sorry to hear that. Holy shit.
Yes, I'm sorry to hear that is like, please don't tell me this shit. Absolutely.
Let me center myself in your grief.
I'm sorry sometimes. Yes, and even I'm sorry sometimes does that, right? And that's an issue that we have culturally as well, of like, we don't know anymore what to say. We kind of just struggle with it, and we say something like, I'm sorry.
Well, if you tell people it's about fucking time, they get really pissed off. Well, true. I feel like that's jumping to the other extreme. Yes.
Yeah.
But no, I think that we aren't really, there's a lot of sort of the platitudes that are given and it's tradition, and so we say them, but we're not necessarily thinking about the words we're saying sometimes. And to someone who is in the throes of that, they're thinking about the words.
Yeah.
And it's hard to be sort of considerate of that, and I understand that because you're not in that space at that time. But things like that were things that we were taught to think about, as like, well, how do we phrase this? What actually is the phrasing? And what is actually helpful? Usually things that are helpful are things like, can I drop off groceries? Can I mow your lawn? Can I take out your trash? Can I, we went out to eat tonight and we were thinking of you, so we brought you something. You know what I mean? Like, they're very physical, immediate needs that when someone is grieving, it's hard to do. And as a society, we don't really have a lot of setup for that. And that's something that I really liked about Bone Dust Woman mentioning that her funerary services would actually go to the house and check in on or call the person, like up to like a year even or more after that person's loved one had died. And I love that because that is something we need more of. We need more of a support system there where people don't feel alienated by their grief. They feel supported in it.
Yeah, it strikes me that could there also be a factor there that our social networks are so wide now, because like I might know somebody casually online. So what do I say to them when they're not close enough? I can't get them groceries. I can't mow their lawn. I couldn't go over and sit with them. And I might not even be inclined to, even if they're close, because we don't have that close of a relationship. But our social network is large enough now where we've interacted. How do we handle those situations?
Oh, well, I mean, first of all, you can get them groceries. It's called delivery.
Fair.
And you absolutely can do it. And you can even get them things that are like sweet treats and things and stuff that are feel goods. It doesn't have to be, like a full grocery order. It could even be getting them flowers and a cake or something, like, whatever you want, basics, etc. So that is possible. But also, it is checking in on them. It is messaging them pointedly and saying, how are you doing today? Do you need anything? Do you need to talk? I'm here if you need me. How's it going? I saw this thing today and it made me laugh. I'm going to share it with you. Right? Because also we don't want to pointedly just make it like, I'm here for you if you need me. Like, just like zone in on them, because they may not want to talk about it. They may actually want a reprieve from it and something light. So, hey, here's a funny meme. Hey, here's this thing that made me laugh. Hey, I saw this and thought of you.
I mean, also,
those
like,
are also ways that you can help.
saying to a person, how can I help you, sometimes is, especially if you're in the middle of grief, is just too much decision making. Especially if they're already dealing with stress, it can lead to decision fatigue and executive dysfunction, because they're already dealing with all that shit, and you're putting another decision on top of that. Which
is why I say it doesn't have to be a whole thing of groceries, for instance. Just get them some treats. You know what I mean? Like, they don't have to make those decisions. As a matter of fact, sometimes just listening to them and checking in with them, you'll find the things they need, because they'll talk to you about it. And they won't expect you to even do it. And then you'll be, okay, well, I know now from talking to them that this is something they're missing, or this is something they're thinking of, or this is something that might help them because this is stressing them out on top of the other stuff. If I have a means to do those things or help with those things or even hold space for those things in a conversation, that's what I'm going to do.
I wanted to ask you about something, but please finish your thought before we switch tracks, because this is a bit of a derailment.
Oh, way in the other direction? Okay. No, I think that was pretty much it. Is like, it doesn't have to be this physical doing thing. It could also be the act of, again, existing with them and letting them kind of be the guide of what they need. And even if they can't say that, just being present with them a lot of times. And like, even if they're like grumpy and they need to vent, let them vent, like let them get it out. And that also is helping.
So the thing that I wanted to ask about was, earlier you mentioned about working with people in a very basic way of getting them into doing shrine work. So what do you advise for people to do when they've had a loss and the person has transitioned? What do you recommend? In my own case, I recommend people wait a year before putting their picture on anything or doing anything with them, to let them get used to being dead. But do you have a different process? Do you have things that you recommend people do, etc.?
Yeah. So if it's something that's really, really recent, then a candle vigil for about a week or so or less, depending on how you feel with that, is usually something that I would suggest if it's like very, very fresh. Just not only in the sense of helping with the sentiment to guide that spirit to where they need to be, but also you, because when a loved one dies, part of us dies with them, I believe. And so, or like even the idea of what we thought we would be, and Bonus Woman touched on that a bit too, actually. And so there is this also lighting a candle for that part of you as well in that simultaneously. And so it's sort of this honoring this shift in this process and sort of putting light on it, almost like the Hermit card, right? And going down that path forward. And so that would be one of the things. Another thing is I am Native, and I'm Native and white. I am Plymouth Rock. Hi, guys. And and one of the things for me was I shaved my hair. And anytime I deal with a loss, one of my ritual ways of doing it culturally is to shave my hair. Because hair is very sacred. It's how you, it's like your intuition. It's how you feel the earth, right? It's your connection. It absorbs many things. That's why we braid it. And so I will shave. I actually shaved it into a death hawk. It was long, like I could sit on it. And I shaved it into a death hawk after my dad died. and kept it that way for a little while. And now it's shaved again because I just went through a big life change. No one died. But that is another thing, is like I would ask them, hey, do you have cultural traditions as well? And perhaps if you don't know, to look into those. Are those things within the ancestor that passed, and also you and etc. Like, are those things within your culture that are specific practices to that you could use to honor that passing and the mourning that's taking process? And that would be one of those things. Shrines. So with them, I don't necessarily do a year, because I've seen some people process super fast.
That's fair.
But I've also seen some people take a long time. And I think that it depends on the ancestor for me. And also usually it depends on them and like how they were prepared to go, or if they were ready, or how they're doing basically coming to like, what is it, coming to like make truth with it, like to see it as the truth, and like this is accept that reality. So that's part of it, but usually I would at least wait like a couple months, and then also that's when I start talking about their grief in that hurricane scenario, where how loud is that? Because if it is too loud, you won't hear them anyway. And what's going to happen is when they try to speak to you, it's what I call the ancestor nightmares start, which is where like they start trying to talk to you in your dreams, but you ain't ready because you have not processed that they are dead fully. You're still in the denial phase, and they're trying to tell you something like, oh, I'm okay, it's fine. And then it turns into a weird black hole sun video where everything goes melty because you are completely rejecting it. Even though you want to talk to them really bad, you have not made peace with the fact that they are dead, and so everything gets distorted. And so that's one of those signs too. It's like, okay, well, maybe step back from the shrine for a little bit, and give some space for yourself and honoring that part of you that died. Then we can talk to them. Yeah.
Gotcha.
That's a really good insight.
I'm more so just like, I guess I more so just look at like sort of the symptoms that are showing, and then judge it through that,
as opposed to a set length of time sort of thing. Yeah, that makes sense. That's interesting. I wonder how often do you find people have those ancestral nightmare type scenarios, especially in our society, the way we have difficulty processing sometimes?
Quite a few. Surprisingly, it's not every single person, of course, but it has been reoccurring since I've started really officially doing this work, and even since I've talked about it on YouTube and stuff several times, and I'll always get comments or someone in the live chat that's like, "Holy shit, that's what that was."
Yeah. I don't think I've run across that concept before, but it makes absolute sense that if they're trying to contact you, but you haven't fully processed or even partially processed, or if you're not ready for it, that could come off very nightmarish. And I had never thought about that before. It even makes me honestly question a little bit some of the concept of hungry ghosts that we hear about so often, because now I have to think about, man, would I have to look into that situation a little bit further? Because was this really a hungry ghost, or was this just a spirit that was trying to make contact and I wasn't ready, and it was a nightmare because of my own grief? That's an interesting question.
Yeah. That's something I think a lot of people don't often look at either, because it's so easy to not do that, right? But we are also responsible for the imagery we bring to that interaction. And sometimes, we can be blocked without even knowing it. Which is another reason, earlier I was talking about like people who have a lot of trauma with the word family and like warming up and finding different ways first. Because if you go directly into it with human ancestors, that's where it's going to head. It's going to head right there immediately. And they're going to be like, I can't do ancestor work. This doesn't work. I'm terrified. Or like, they came to me in my dreams, or they're messing with me, or I don't feel safe. And like, yes, of course, because, some of them absolutely are messed up. But also, sometimes our own fear can shape things into other stuff as well, right? And into being a threat. And so that's why, you start on the peripheral first. So yeah, I mean, it's very easy to be like, oh, it's them, but sometimes it's us.
Yeah. Well, I think to me, it just signals that like when you're helping someone with ancestor work, or if you're doing your own ancestor work, that this is one more question that you could throw into the mix when it comes to things like introspection and meditation and divination, which seems really like that's, like I said, I think you might be the first one I've ever heard talk about that, but it seems to me that throwing that into your questioning and divination could make a huge difference for the outcomes that some people are experiencing and the time frames they can experience them in. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this, Aaron?
I think that people are way too eager to dispense with the culture that they grow up around as an influencing factor. I cannot tell you how many times I have had readings where, is this a god trying to get a hold of me? Is this a spirit? Like, yes, technically it is, but it's a dead relative and they just want your attention. Well, why am I thrashing in my sleep? Well, because you don't want to hear what they have to say. You're fighting with it. You're literally physically fighting with the message. I mean, it's so funny. Like we've seen these fielded questions before, and you and I have tag teamed on them, and it's so funny when people like get this jaw drop of "I'm the problem." Like, yeah, your dead relative's fine. You just don't want to hear him fucking talk. To the point where I get it often enough where I damn near threaten to make a placard that says, do you do ancestor work? If not, come back and then get divination done. Because inevitably ancestor shit would crop up. Yes. I did a series of readings at a shop, Cocapelli's Corner, for a psychic fair they had. It was my first psychic fair. And I swear to you, the whole 8 hours that I spent sitting in that chair, I would say about 90% of my work was, please talk with your fucking ancestors. And, well, I've had these deep-seated issues and all this, da-da-da-da. Okay, great. Your ancestors want to talk. That's what that's about.
Well, I suppose we shouldn't be shocked to a certain degree. I mean, you could be an 80-year-old man and sit down with a therapist and find out you still got mom or dad issues. I mean, why the hell shouldn't we should not be surprised that ancestor problems and issues creep up so often in our spiritual work.
Yeah. And I'm being a little tongue in cheek because it wasn't all just issues. It was also like, hey, there's a problem that your ancestor wants to help with, and because of your attitude, it's really limiting their desire. I had a couple of clients where it's like, you got to really check your attitude, because if you want your ancestors' help on this, and you say you do, you got to do it in a way that they approve of. Otherwise, it isn't going to fucking work. Right. So to a certain degree, we have to bend for our ancestors.
Absolutely. That's an interesting note too, is we have to bend for our ancestors. So like, there is a lot of like ancestral worship, ancestral veneration, and that kind of thing. And in that, it does sort of put the ancestors center in terms of us asking them for things and stuff like that. But we are also center of that because we are part of that chain. Yeah. And so therefore we have a responsibility as well. And if you are ancestor working and you're not thinking about your responsibility as part of that chain, you ain't ancestor working. I'm sorry.
Right. Well, and I mean, it's never so simple. Right? Because like the example you guys were given earlier with carpenters and electricians and stuff, let's say you've got an issue with income or finance. And so you're asking your ancestor for help. Yes. Grandfather was a banker. He's going to be able to help us out. But you haven't first challenged your own fears and misconceptions about money. There's no way that's going to work like you think it's going to. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like if you that's one of those things where it's not your ancestor's fault. And to some degree, it's not your fault, but it's just something that you have to resolve to make that ancestor work effective.
Mm-hmm. In the Ancestral 101 course that I have, there's a whole section that talks about blockages. And one of the the core parts of it is like, is it you, Jesus? Like, is it you? Did you do it? Let's consider this. Let's sit in that for a little while. You might be like, no, it's not me, but I just want you to sit with it. Just sip on it a little and see how it sets with you, really. Because yeah, sometimes it's sneaky. Sometimes we don't realize that we are the ones doing that. And your ancestors could be working to the bone trying to do it, but they are limited also because you have choice within being the living ancestor. And so sort of like that active point. And if you're blocking, then like if you're sitting down on the ground, I guess we ain't walking.
Right.
So yeah, if you go to your ancestors asking for money help and you refuse to do anything that actually would make you money, they are going to have to work overtime to try and find you money.
Well,
so
this comes up
harder.
in deity work too, where you've asked for help.
Yep.
They're trying to present ways that you could be helped. If you're resisting, sometimes they'll give up on you, but other times they'll say, well, this carrot ain't working. So that all leaves is the stick.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, your ancestors might be doing some nasty stuff to you sometimes, but it's because you are not listening to what you need to be doing.
I think too, there was something that I think both of you have touched on in being very careful about which categories of ancestors you want to talk to, because like sometimes you really need the bastard to sort things out. But if you're asking for the good ancestors, and I think that can sometimes be the factor too, is if you're carte blanche reaching out to all your dead people, that is different than reaching out to your ancestors that have your best interests at heart. Because the ancestors that have your best interests at heart might communicate like pricks, but they're going to do it for your own good. Whereas the ancestors that just want your attention and your energy ain't going to contribute.
It's also important, too, to know who your key players are, if you will. Like, for instance, the role that I often call the bouncer. There is always at least one ancestor. Many of them can do that, but there's always at least one that's kind of like the head honcho when it comes to it. And they are the one that will look someone new over and either give a nod of approval or a of disapproval, right? And and you know instantly what to do with that person. And that is also another part of it. When people come and work with me, I always ask, like, okay, who's your bouncer? Who's your welcome committee? Who's your translator? Like, who, you got to know your people. Who is your team? And, they're all your team, but there are core people who step up and accept that role as part of, I call it the spiritual posse, like your crew. And that help you out as you help them, because you're part of that crew too. Mm-hmm. And so, know who your bouncer is. Know who your bouncer is. Because if it's not cool with the bouncer, you should probably rethink what you're doing.
This is, I think, part of like having a coherent cosmology is so fucking important. In part because if you don't know who the bouncers are even supposed to be.
Yeah.
So in heathenry, we have Disir. And these are powerful female ancestors, and they, generally speaking, are the ones that organize a lot of the family lines. But they also, as I've done spirit work, the Fedrar, the powerful male ancestors, the Ergi, the powerful queer spirit worker ancestors, and the Thaver, the powerful queer ancestors, have all come out to me in some way, shape, or form, pardon the pun, who have some kind of organizing role to play, and they often fulfill this role of the bouncer. And that's like baked into the cosmology, at the very least, are the Desir. And the other ones, well, not every heathen works with these other groups, but that's my own thing. But having that as an identifiable thing in your cosmology is actually really important, because especially if you're fresh new to things, you don't have to figure out who all these individual beings are. You can just say, hey, Desir, come help me out. I don't know who the fuck this person is.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's also beneficial, is knowing that you have those people who are in those roles, so you can do that. I think when I say, hey, know who your bouncer is, know who this person is, who's your welcome committee, who, all of this, people get overwhelmed when they're first starting. But, that's slowly built up over time, and you can always refer to them as their role. They know who they are, even if you don't,
I do have a question, and this is, if you're ready, we're going to shift topics just a little bit here, because a question came up on our Discord today, and I was actually kind of fascinated by it and the timing of it. And with you doing mediumship work and that sort of thing, I actually thought this would be a great question to ask you. And the question was, do you ever feel like a deceased person, is no longer contactable or no longer connected spiritually to any of the people they were connected to in life, because they have not just moved on, but like almost ceased to exist as the same verifiable soul identity? Like, have you had people essentially like drop out of the spirit line or the ancestor line and just kind of like vanish?
Yes, actually, my Aunt Violet. My aunt in blood has, and for a long time I wanted to work with her specifically. I was like, I can talk to all these people, but I can't talk to you, and you're the one that she would be my great aunt, and so she was dead by the time that I was living, but I'm a lot like her, I'm told, and so I always wanted to talk to her, and I tried, and finally my grandmother, her mother, came in and was like, my great grandmother, and was like, who is also my bouncer for the record, and was like, look, that ain't gonna happen. Like, I appreciate that you want that, and we can all tell you about her, but like, she's not, like she has, there is no phone line there anymore. It is shut down.
This call cannot be completed as dialed.
Right, exactly. This call cannot be completed as dialed. And when I asked why, they simply said, well, she's chosen that. She's chosen to not be here. And in that, sort of not be anywhere for all I know. Mm-hmm. And I kind of looked at it as well, maybe that energy got recycled back into something else. Maybe she chose to be in a whole other avenue. I'm not sure. But yes, I have had that happen, and it actually was my own family.
Wow. Well, that kind of makes sense in a way. I mean, not everybody, as a spirit, you might make the choice to, could call it move on, could call it whatever, but if they just kind of drop out of the lineage, or they can't be contacted to a larger degree, we don't know what happened to them. So it is just kind of vanishing to a certain degree, but that makes sense.
I always sort of looked at it as like the recycling of energy into like the soul into elsewhere, into something else, into a different sort of energy. Because I mean, I am a believer and it can't be like destroyed. So I think in some element she exists on some level in terms of the energy that she was, but she isn't there anymore. She is not she. She is not part of it. And like, we have the memory of that, and that memory has power, and those imprints are still there. But the source is not that source anymore. No.
Yeah, I knew that was going to be a good question to ask on this interview.
No, that's a very good question. I have never been asked that before, but yeah, it totally happened to me. Yes.
Yeah, we have a really good Discord community, and people ask some really amazing questions and are experts in areas that are always surprising to me. And that was just one that popped up today. I'm like, yes, we must ask.
Yeah, and imagine my frustration. I was trying and trying and trying. I'm like, okay, look, I got this specialty. I can talk to dead people. I can finally talk to my Aunt Violet. Nope.
No, you can't.
Denied. So I get it. It's frustrating, but also, I don't know. I think that was just her choice.
Yeah. Yep. Well, thank you, wonderful Discord participant. You know who you are, but we appreciate
thank you.
that input. I did also want to ask a little bit, Cris, about how you got started on your path, because you said that you had a pagan and a Christian parent. So, like, how did your path progress? How did you kind of get to where you are now?
Oh, well, I'm born in the boonies on a peninsula, water in 3 directions. And my father was Christian, and my mother was always very quote unquote earth based. She's pagan, and and so I was raised kind of in both. My mother was always a seeker. From a very young age, she would ask questions of the Christian churches and etc., and not really get the answers that she wanted. And so from there, she found paganism. Now, my great grandmother was also the town healer. Native salves, tinctures. You couldn't afford the doctor, you came to see her, right? And so that was already kind of in our line in terms of the sort of herbal craft and that kind of thing. My mother is an herbologist, aromatherapist, etc., and nurse as well. And so healing has always been in our line. We have always been sort of the country healers and energy workers. But my mother, upon really dedicating into the more earth-based beliefs, the more sort of spiritualities as opposed to sort of the Christianity thing, the more she dug and dug and dug, the more she was like, oh, wait, this is stuff that we've already been doing in our family for a really long time. And also sort of the like colonization that had happened too, because there is native ancestry as well. And so a lot of it also was sort of washed over and was hard to find. And that is actually earlier when I said there were stories that were lost to me that I had to go to the astral to get. That's part of that, is because a lot of the living ancestors at the time in the family would not speak of being native. Because if you spoke of that, that's how you got killed or punished, or put somewhere. Mm-hmm. So you didn't say that. And so we dug in that too, and, had a lot of sort of breaking down things that had been sort of skimmed over or changed, and fact checking things and looking through that. And really, as she discovered things and she developed her own stuff also in tandem with what had already been handed down, I started too. And from a pretty young age, I was pretty curious about cultures and spirituality. I remember I was homeschooled and I was like 10 or 11, and she got this like big thick book on like Egyptian mythology and the culture and how they lived and all of this and their rituals. And she got it because she was going to break it down into little manageable chapters for me and go through it slowly, but she left it on the table, and anything on the table is fair game, guys. That's the rule. So I brought it upstairs in my room and binged read it in a night.
Wow.
And she was like, oh, I need to break that up into a thing. And I was like, oh, you mean that book on the table? And she's, yeah. And I was like, oops, I kind of already read it, but it was really good. Can we do more of those? And so from a young age, that was also something, is like the idea of there were different cultures and spiritualities other than one, because obviously I had a Christian father and a mother who was pagan, right? And so like different, right there from the start, like there were different views of life and what the meaning was. And then also just exploring that through other cultures, spiritualities, etc., seeing how other people believed. And I think that was one of the biggest things from a young age, having that, in the idea that there isn't really one answer. It's just everyone's different perspective. And that ultimately many of us are just seeking to sort of heal and commune in some way, whatever that is for us, and continue, right? And so that then fell into me getting this little book. I have it somewhere, actually. It never is far from me, but it is called The Tao of Pooh, and it's by Benjamin Hoff. And it is literally a book written like this guy trying to explain Taoism to Pooh Bear. And he's using Pooh characters to explain it. And this simple act of sort of, why do we not honor the tree as being a tree? Why must we make it into something else? Why do we say it's a waste? We could sit under its shade. We could enjoy it. the sound of the leaves and the breeze. But, no, we come and make it into firewood. We use it as other things. Or we could make it into firewood. Sorry, we could make it into firewood. We could do all of these things with it and it would be useful. But because we aren't, because it doesn't serve the purpose that we need it for, like maybe, I don't know, a chain. We would need a chain. So this tree is useless to us. No, that tree is still a tree and has many uses. You're just not using it the way it needs to be used. And so this mentality of like everything is what it is and exists as it should be, you just got to figure out what that is, really spoke to me as a kid because I saw that as people, as all of that. And we fitting ourselves into molds that we just don't have to fit in the first place. We simply are, and honoring that. And I was like maybe 13 when I found that book. And you can imagine a 13-year-old and all the teenage, stuff going on. Mind was blown. And so, at that point, I had dedicated myself. And when I first started out, I was about 11, and I was working with Hecate and Horus. So I've always mixed pantheons. I'm sorry to anybody who cringes at that, but I've always have. Who comes to me, and that's who I work with. But yes, so there was that. But also, from a very young age, I was talking to spirits. I just always have. If you ask my mother, I have always been in my room talking to my quote-unquote self. I remember being like 7, and it'd be the first day of school and the night before it, and so I was holding out outfits and things and laying them on the bed and asking the ancestors, which one should I wear? What do you think? And like feeling for them in their answer. And so from a very young age, I had that. I did not see yet. They didn't let me sort of have the ability to see, I'll say, until I was older and could deal with that, which I'm blessed for that. Thank you. But I do remember from a very young age being able to feel them and talk to them. And even there are stories of when I was in a crib and having a conversation with the local spirit, and then we moved. I would say the name. It was a very old name. And then we moved, and then I would never speak about that name again because the spirit wasn't there anymore.
Yeah, right. You moved.
Yeah, we moved.
I wanted to point something out earlier. When you said, I mix pantheons, like the scholar Terry Gunnell wrote an article called Pantheon, What Pantheon, in which the notion of pantheons is kind of dismembered. And I think that anybody who is coming into paganism, anybody that's coming to these concepts, it's probably best to dispense with the idea of pantheon and think of it more like there's culture groups. There's, so in the case of like Nordic heathenry, different parts of Sweden at different time periods worship different gods as the head of whatever their local cultus would have been. Like, there's no one structure that has stayed throughout all of time. So why would we limit ourselves when we have access to all these different gods? And I'm not saying Pokemon it, but I'm also not saying like limit yourself either. It's just just something that I wanted to bring to folks' attention.
Yeah, honestly, I agree. I kind of feel like pantheons sometimes are air quotes pantheons. It's different entities, deities, whatever. It's like using watercolors on wet paper. As soon as you get them close to each other, they start going all over the place and making their own borders. So,
I mean, your relationships with the gods are just that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yes. Your relationships with them are yours. And I mean, like, that's like Hecate for me. I see Hecate very differently than many people see her, but she was a trades goddess. You can't, there's like so many versions. Oh, come on.
Right. And a lot of the most popular gods that we know from like Greek culture were imported from other cultures, like the Phoenician Aphrodite, if I'm remembering that correctly. Dionysus went all over the place. And, I
think also we're talking about archetypes ultimately as well. archetypes that have served in different cultures as needed for what their land was, what their climate was, what their culture was, etc. And, I don't know what I am in terms of hard polytheist, soft polytheist, omnitheist, whatever. I think that they are individual, but I think that they are very much connected, and they do speak many of the same points with different mouths, And so I think that makes complete sense to me. And really, yes, the more you research them, the more it gets traced back. And honestly, that's a lot like Ancestry too. The more you research where the line is, you realize that there isn't really a line. They all run together. And there are maybe core spots way back there. But overall, there's a lot of blending. there's a lot of, area of effect, if you will, gamers. Once it splays outward. We got a source, but then we start blending over.
I mean, the thing about that too that strikes me, whether it's as death work comes down the line from that, or as life work, if you will, comes down from that. It's great that you can find all these things in the source, but the source is undifferentiated and it's a jumbled fucking mess, and it's hard to relate to. And so I think to a certain degree, when you're talking about, I relate to this God this way, or this is the God of, this is an attempt to kind of put some kind of understanding on beings that in some ways are just unfucking knowable in their entirety. I mean, if I don't know the whole of Jim, and I've known Jim for over 15 years now.
Yeah, something like that.
So I don't know the whole of Jim. Even Jim, I can guarantee there are parts of Jim that even his closest relatives, his closest people don't know.
Absolutely.
If I don't have that level of access with Jim, if they don't have that level of access with Jim, I think after a certain point, it's kind of it's not just that our gods are unknowable in their entirety. It's that everything is unknowable in its entirety.
It's because I'm a Cancer. I hide my squishy bits in my shell.
I have a Cancer moon. I know that feel. Yeah. I mean, I concur. I think that is actually Hell in herself worked with that whole lesson with me, specifically that lesson. But there are so many versions of us through other people's eyes as well. And when you get into that on top of not knowing someone for who they are as they see themselves, and then also the idea that we exist in other forms in other people, it gets really interesting, right? So, I mean, deity is very unique to the person, and only you and that deity know what your work is, truly. And, yes, when we are talking about cultural things, it's important to be respectful. It's important to do our research. It's important to know sources of things, history, credit, etc. But isn't that also part of the work?
I would hope so.
I would sure hope so too. Yeah, absolutely. But no, so but getting back to Jim's question about growing up and how I got here, I ended up going to a lot of workshops and things with my mother, Reiki, different healing modalities. I did a lot of energy work stuff when I was a teen. And I think that was a big part of that. And then, of course, the drummings, as I mentioned earlier, with the ancestors, at least twice a month. And we would have gatherings of people would come, or we would sort of hopscotch people who hosted as well sometimes. And having that. And I was always around a lot of crones from a very young age. And a few hunters and sages in there, but there was a lot of crones, and around a fire, and that has kind of been the central part of my upbringing. That and sort of just spending time with our elders, both, like I said, after getting dropped off from the bus, but then also the fact that the crones were there and they were much older than me. There's a lot of wisdom to catch there. And just, I don't know, I always have felt more comfortable with that aspect. And so that aspect also means that in a quote unquote natural life, that would be close to the death gate. And that's part of it too. They're in a space where a lot of times they're like, yeah, that's a reality. Like, this isn't a one day, it's a reality, right? And they, I think, have come a little more to terms with that than some of the others because they are so close to that gate. If we are talking about sort of the expected sort of line of mortality. I think that was some of it too. And then, I did 9-to-5 jobs. I worked retail. I was a freezer grunt and stuff like that. But the thing is no matter where I worked, I ended up doing things anyway. I would be reading for my coworker. I would be counseling, doing spiritual counseling. I would do healing. Here's a spell. Here, let me show you how to do this or that. Or have you ever thought of that? Well, your grandmother says this. And eventually I got to this point after my dad's death and all of that happening that I was like, what am I doing? Like, why am I in a freezer doing this when, like, death could take me at any time she wants to? And I have this thing that I'm doing no matter where I am. Why am I not just pointedly doing that to be able to provide that space and maximize, like, doing this? Like, if I was born into doing this, if this is just, it just goes with me and who I am, why is that not what I'm doing? Like, all the time, if possible. And so I left that job. I was a manager. I left that job and I got a part-time, and I started building up my business. I took the money from leaving that because I'd been there for a while, and that's how I got everything to afford starting the whole business. And I worked part-time and had certain days that I scheduled people and did that. And then eventually it got to where it was so full that I didn't need the part-time job. And I opened up those days too and did it full time. And yeah, I think it's just always going to be something I do no matter what whether it's full time, it's part time or whatever. It comes with me. And the beauty of this is that now I get to do it, fully. I get to sort of like help more people to help themselves. And I love that because that also makes me happy.
Yeah, I think Sarah and I can both totally relate to, we do that work no matter where we go.
Yeah. It comes with you. It's just innate.
Yep.
Yeah, you can't get rid of it. You can't get away from it. It follows you.
Nope.
I'm on vacation. Sure you are.
I'm just picking up an IPA from the store. No, you're not.
Nope, you're not.
You mean our IPA?
I'm just stopping in to see what this new store has in their, storefront. It looks like it's interesting. It's a new season. Let me go in. Oh my God, I just read about the girls at the counter. Like, it happens all the time. I remember one time I had been working at work like 80 hours a week. I had figured out, and I really needed a break. And so I went to a party of a friend's.
Oh no.
His girlfriend was there who we had never met. Yeah. And I am imbibing and relaxing and really looking forward to just like being off clock, if you will. Mm-hmm. And that is not a thing. And as I'm talking to her about all these different things, I start seeing her grandfather and how he died, and her grandmother's energy and all of this other stuff coming in. And I'm really trying to focus on her and listen. But you know what? Like, the combination of liquor and that makes it really difficult. And according to her, I looked kind of down in a way, which is one of my tells for when I'm listening to a spirit, is because I'm like really distracted over here. And And then I asked if she knew what I did, like as a business. And she was like, yeah, he told me a little bit about it, the boyfriend. And I said, okay, well, do you mind if I give you a message? Because I try to ask for permission. And then it turned into the rest of the night was that, which got into ancestral trauma stuff, which got into other ancestors coming forward, which got and we ended up just being like, let's just go in this room over here, and do this. Because this was the first time that she had showed up to a party. It was the first time I'd met her. And of course it happens like that.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. So meanwhile, we've got people playing pool and and bellowing and whatever in the background. And we're over here so let's talk about your ancestral trauma.
Yep.
So no matter where I go, even if it's time off, it's still time on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think there's still value in. I love it. I think there's still value in setting office hours. Sometimes they're more aspirational than strongly enforced.
Yes. It's good to have a guideline. It's good to do that and enforce that. But sometimes there are just special occasions where it's just really needed. Mm-hmm. And I oftentimes will trust, if my bouncer and my welcome committee and all are down for it, I will tend to trust them because they know things that I don't know about that person and where they're at.
Right. Billiards and ancestral trauma coming this fall to ESPN 8 The Ocho.
Absolutely. Not what I expected. Not what I expected. No. But it was a good night still.
That's good.
That's great that your business is going so well for you, though. I'm really happy to hear that, because that means that more people have the chance to experience it. And one more, I feel like, and Sarah has brought this up before many times, it's important that we have the ability as a larger spiritual community to be able to have people that are more specialists now than there used to be. Mm-hmm. And so it just another person that's doing sort of a speciality is a really important thing to building a larger community in its own right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if we're looking at sort of the medical field with doctors, we have the general one, but then we have the people who are trained in that specific area and know finer details. And that makes complete sense to me that we would have that and have a need for that. And not everybody needs the same stuff.
Yeah.
Also,
exactly.
On top of that, not everybody has the same delivery either. So even outside of the knowledge of those things, maybe you need a healer that's a little more blunt. Maybe you need one that's more of a Kuan Yin bedside. You know what I'm saying? There's a different, there's a different vibe across that board, and some people work better with one than the other, and that's just how it is. And it doesn't mean that either are better or worse. It's just who you need.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Sarah, was there anything else that you wanted to ask or bring up?
I don't know. It's just, I really appreciate you taking so much time out to talk about your own practice and how you view things, and really giving us sort of a quick deep dive on death work from a very different perspective from the other two people we've had the pleasure of interviewing. And I really appreciate that not only is it radically different, but all of the different factors that you've been through and the experiences that make up where you've come from with this are still active living portions of how you interface with other people, of where you bring yourself and your spiritual work and the expression of all these things kind of from this milieu that you got to grow up with. It is such a different perspective, and I'm really appreciating it. I'm just sitting back and just reminiscing over the last almost 2 hours that we've been sitting here. And one of the things that keeps cropping up is, not everybody has to do the death work, and not everybody has to do XYZ. But for those who are really called to do this, it's something that you, as much as you might want to initially, you can't ignore it. It won't let you be. And it's something that intertwines with your life in ways that you don't expect.
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, there was a phase of time where I was like, how am I going to work this death midwifery into the things, that I want to do or that I already do? How does that even meld? Because they feel like two very different areas that they exist, but they're actually really not. And, I appreciate you saying that because yes, it has been sort of like a, one of those like raveled strings that kind of go back and forth and loop around itself and out and da-da-da. But, we out here and we're here and, and it all kind of has brought me to the place I am. And, on top of that, I've got priestessing via my family, my animal is a phoenix through that. Which is all about the death and the rebirth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And me being a voice for the ancestral women in the family. And so that is also a part of that for me. And then also a priestess through Luxunis, where that's a whole other aspect of energy work that I pull from. And that goes into more of the interdimensional kind of space of things. And so it's not just the roots, it's extended out very far in the things that I work with, but all of it is really sort of this skeleton of ancestors. And all of it is experiences, which when we're talking to the ancestors and we're working with them, what are we asking them for? We're asking them for their knowledge from their experiences.
Right,
Exactly.
right. Yeah. Let us learn some lessons from you, which is much easier than learning them the hard way.
Yeah. Don't do what I did. Yeah, absolutely. And then also being able to pass that on to others who are living in your line. And that's something actually that I would like to put in. Because a lot of times I have people say, well, I don't want to do ancestor work because it's not important to me because I'm not having kids. Yeah, well, join the club. I don't have kids. I don't have a want for kids. However, and kids are great. And, people that have them continue. Not that you needed to be told. But, but it's not for me. However, I do have nieces. I do have nephews. I do have people that I interact with who are my friends who have kids. I am still an adult and an example in their life. And so because of that, I am still a living ancestor to them. And so when you say, hey, I don't really want to do ancestral work, I don't really have a place in that because I don't need to heal for my kids because I'm just not continuing the generation. We're done. I don't feel, that that's something worth it. I would say, one, it doesn't have to be worth it. It could just be a choice that you don't want to do, first of all. But two, if it is because you don't feel like it's worth it, I would ask you where your trauma is. We would have a whole conversation about that. But also, I would ask you to consider the others who aren't direct descendants.
Yeah.
Because you are actively in a world where you are setting an example, whether you realize it or not. And there's, again, that word responsibility that comes with that too. And so, it's not for everybody. And I get that. But if that's one of your reasons, maybe consider the fact that it's not having a blood kid necessarily.
You mentioned earlier that, some people have a very, one of the first things you talked about, people have a very difficult sometimes with the word like family. And part of that is they might not have people in their life, even though they might have a mother and father. They might not have a mother and father or ancestors that are worthy of respect. Even if I were not to have kids, if I'm just trying to live a good life and be a good human being and lead by a good example, I might actually be more beneficial to that person as an example of what an ancestor could or should look like. And so, we're all part of the greater family of humanity to a degree. So we have those responsibilities as well.
Absolutely. And that's, like you said, that gets us into the teacher and the neighbor and the aunt and, those kind of people that are in our lives that maybe weren't our immediate parents, but have been role models in some way in our life. And,
Yep.
you know, did they think about that? Maybe, maybe not. But, you know, you are one of those to somebody.
Yep, agreed. Well, Cris, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has been such a good conversation. I've enjoyed it so much. The link to your website, which is CrisAshburn.com, will be in the show notes for everybody. Plus, they can find you, as you said, TikTok, Instagram, all over the place, right? So,
Yes.
Yep, Patreon too.
that's right.
Patreon,
Oh, in the
yeah,
Patreon,
Patreon.
yes.
Patreon is the biggest thing right now because it just opened as of the 1st. So that's the one I'm pushing. Like, hey, everybody, check this out.
Wow.
Excellent.
You just opened it on the 1st. I think you've got like, 400 and some odd posts already.
So it used to go, it went for like 3 years. And then I took a lull because I needed that space. I had a lot of life changes. And now I'm coming back. And so
Awesome.
I'm really happy to be back because creation makes me very happy. And being in that space makes me really happy. So I'm excited. But yeah, so that's the thing that I'm really like pumped about right now and making sure that people are aware.
We'll
and
definitely put those
also,
in the show notes too.
Also in the Patreon, there are discounted sessions. And that is specifically because some people are on fixed income or low income. And I work with those people as well. And that is what that's for. It's limited spaces. And sometimes they keep them for a long amount of time. But I put that there as an option for someone because truly, if you want to work, if you want to show up and do it, then I'll work with you. You know?
Yeah, you have a lot of nice levels. And I was looking at it earlier. It's a very nice setup. So
thank you. Yeah. Yeah, you can find me there and you can find me on my website and all over the place. Just search CrisAshburn.com. Make sure you're not putting an H in my name and you'll find me.
Well, thank you again for joining us. And thank you to all of our wonderful Patreon supporters as well. Thank you to our Discord community, all the people that like and share the show. Your reviews count for a lot. Even just something like giving us 5 stars counts for a lot. It bumps us up on those algorithms, and it's something that you can do for us, or another thing that you can do for us besides listening. But we do appreciate you, and we appreciate our entire community. So thank you, everybody, for listening tonight, and we will talk to you next time around the fire.